Imagine waking up one morning and the sun is there, but it does not shine. It hangs in the sky like a pale coin, weak as if it is dying. Noon feels like dusk, shadows vanish, the air turns sharp. At first, people think it will pass, a strange day perhaps, an odd sky, but then days turns into weeks, weeks into months, and the sun never fully returns. Crops begin to rot in the fields, animals stop breeding, people start to starve across continents from Europe to Asia. Millions of people witness the same impossible sight, a darkened world, a fading sun. This was not a legend, this was not a religious myth. This happened and it changed human history forever. The year was 536 AD. Historians would later describe it as the worst year to be alive, not because of war, not because of invasion, but because the natural order itself collapsed. The sun, the most reliable thing humans have ever known, failed. Today, we know what caused it, but for the people living through it, this felt like the end of the world. This is the story of the day the sun disappeared. My name is Rami. Welcome to the show. There was no single moment people could point to and say this when it began. Instead, it crept in. Days where the sun felt weaker than usual, afternoons that never quite brightened, a sky that looked permanently washed out. In Constantinople, Procopius noticed something deeply unsettling. Procopius was not a monk or a prophet. He was a court historian writing official accounts for the Byzantine Empire during the reign of Emperor Justinian. His job was to document wars, politics, and state affairs, not omens or superstition. So, when he wrote that the sun shone without brightness like the moon, he was describing a physical reality that disrupted daily life. And this was not just Constantinople. The same sky was reported in Italy, Gaul, and the eastern Mediterranean, and as far away as China. From the Atlantic to the East Asia, people looked up to the sky and saw a sun that no longer behaved as it should. Shadows became faint, timekeeping became unreliable, farmers struggled to judge seasons. Similar descriptions appear in texts from Italy, Gaul, and the Levant area. What makes this extraordinary is the consistency. These writers did not know each other, they didn't share beliefs, yet they described the same sky. This was not regional weather, it was planetary. When nature behaves strangely, human looks for meaning. And in the 6th century, meaning was moral. If the sun dimmed, it wasn't accidental, it was a message. Religious leaders interpreted it as the darkness through the scriptures. Some warned of divine punishment, others spoke of final judgment. In cities, mass prayers replaced markets, processions replaced festivals. People fasted, ironically worsening the famine. In some places, fear did not stay private, it became organized. In the Byzantine world, church records describe mass penitential processions. Entire cities were ordered into the streets. Men, women, and children walked barefoot through cold air, chanting prayers, confessing sins, begging God to restore the light. These were not spontaneous gatherings, they were sanctioned by both church and state. The logic was simple. If the sun had dimmed, then God must be very angry, and the only solution was a collective repentance. Similar scenes unfolded across Western Europe, in Gaul, and northern Italy. Bishops called for extended fasting, even as crops failed and food supplies collapsed. Chronicles like Gregory of Tours describe famine, fear, and the widespread belief that the darkness in the sky reflected a deeper moral collapse. To modern ears, this sounded rational, but to people living in the 6th century, it was the most logical response available. They were not afraid of hunger, they were afraid that the moral order of the universal world had been broken. Meanwhile, rulers faced a crisis of legitimacy. If kings ruled by God's will, what did a darkened sun say about their rule? Rebellions did not always erupt, but trust eroded. Authority weakened, not by violence, but by doubt. The mystery lasted more than a millennium. No medieval scholar could imagine an eruption powerful enough to affect the entire planet. But ice remembers what humans forget. Ice cores act like time capsules. Each layer captures a single year of atmospheric history, dust, chemicals, even pollution. In layers dated to 536 AD, scientists found extreme sulfur concentration, volcanic glass fragments, chemical fingerprints of massive eruption. The evidence points to an eruption so large it injected material into the stratosphere, not just the lower atmosphere. At that height, particles can circle the Earth for years. Sunlight bounced away, daylight reached the ground, weakened. The darkness did not just confuse farmers, it also confused governments. By the 6th century, empires like the Byzantine were highly organized systems. Taxes were calculated around the agriculture calendars. Military supply chains depended on predictable harvests. Bureaucracy assumed that spring, summer, and autumn would behave as they always had. When the sun dimmed, those assumptions collapsed. Crops ripened late or not at all. Winters lingered, and summers arrived cold and uncertain. Imperial administrators struggled to answer basic questions. When should taxes be collected? How much grain should cities receive? How do you supply an army when harvests no longer follow a schedule? In some regions, tax demands remained fixed. Even as yields shrank, this created quite a tension between the state and its people. Not rebellion, but paralysis. Governors could not explain the sky, and emperors could not command the sun to return. What had once been a finely tuned imperial machine began to grind, slowly out of sync with nature itself. This is how climate shock undermines power, not suddenly, not violently, but by making the world impossible to predict. A 2-degree drop does not sound catastrophic today, but pre-industrial farming had no buffer, no fertilizers, no global imports, no emergency reserve. Crops depended entirely on sunlight. When sunlight weakened, growing season shortened, seeds failed to mature, harvests shrank year after year. Imagine a farmer planting the same field his family had worked for generations. The seeds sprout, the sun stays weak, and the harvest never comes. Summer frost killed bud overnight. Livestock starved slowly. Famine did not arrive as one disaster, it arrived as exhaustion. People ate seed grain, then livestock, then nothing. Entire regions starved simultaneously, something rarely seen before or since. Starvation does not stay isolated. Malnutrition weakened immune systems, and in the early 540, a new crisis emerged, one that would define the century. It was the outbreak of what we call now the Justinian plague. The first appeared in 541 AD. Contemporary sources place its arrival at the Egyptian port of Pelusium, near the Nile Delta. From there, it followed the arteries of the empire. Grain ships carried it north to Constantinople. Trade routes carried it east and west. And by 542, it had reached the heart of the Byzantine world. The timing was catastrophic. Population were already weakened by years of falling harvest and the climate instability. When the diseases arrived, it moved through a world that was physically and administratively vulnerable. The Byzantine historian Procopius, who was living in Constantinople at the time, left one of the most detailed contemporary accounts. He described a city where daily life slowed and stopped, government offices closed, trade stalled, normal civic routines broke down, not from panic, but from exhaustion. What made this plague especially destructive was not just its severity, but also its duration. This was not a single outbreak. The disease returned in waves for nearly 2 centuries, repeating roughly every generation. Some regions were hit hard, others never fully recovered between breaks. Modern genetic research confirms the cause was Yersinia pestis, the same bacterium responsible for the Black Death centuries later. But the world struck in the 6th century was different. Urban life was densely packed. Grain distribution was centralized. Empires depended on constant movement of people, animals, and goods. The plague exposed those dependencies. There are strange but telling details in the sources. The chronicles describe people who appeared to recover only to fall ill again months later. Others noted that animals died alongside humans, an observation modern science now recognizes as a sign of zoonotic disease. And yet, even as the plague spread, the empire attempted to function. Laws were still issued, taxes were still demanded, military campaigns were still planned. But the cumulative effect was profound. The population shrank, labor became scarce. The ancient Mediterranean world, interconnected, urban, and complex, did not collapse in a single moment. It thinned slowly and permanently. And yet, humanity endured, not by returning to the old world, but by changing it. The crisis of the 6th century did not end suddenly. Temperatures recovered slowly over decades rather than years. Plague outbreaks faded unevenly. Stability returned in fragments, not all at once. When it did, the world that emerged looked very different from the one that had collapsed. Large, centralized empires never fully regained their old reach. Instead, power fragmented. Smaller, more local systems replaced global ones. Communities learned a hard lesson. Survival depended on resilience, not scale. Farming adapted first. In many regions, people shifted toward tougher crops that could tolerate colder, less predictable climates. Also adopted mixing farming instead of relying on one crop. Smaller fields worked closer to settlements. Storage became just as important as production. Archaeological evidence shows increased use of grain pits dug into the ground, raised wooden granaries, local food reserve controlled by communities, not distant authorities. Food was no longer assumed, it was planned. Economies changed too. Long-distance trade declined, local exchange expanded, cities shrank, but villages stabilized. Political power followed the same pattern. Authority became more personal and local, rooted in land, protection, and obligation. This was the soil from which new forms of power grew. In parts of Europe, it laid the groundwork for the feudal relationships. In the Eastern Mediterranean and the Near East, states reorganized around leaner administration and more flexible system of taxations. Across regions, societies became less dependent on a single, central, and more capable of survival the shock. What we later called the Dark Ages were not a collapse of intelligence, they were recalibration. People remembered the sky that failed them, and they built a system designed to endure its silence. This is how humanity survived the darkness, not through dominance, but through adaptation. We like to believe civilizations are permanent, that tomorrow will look like today. History tells us otherwise. In 536 AD, the sun went quiet and the world changed forever. Not with explosions, not with armies, but with silence. This was the day the sun disappeared. If you found this story interesting, hit like, share, and subscribe, and let me know in the comments. What do you think the modern society would struggle to survive without today?